Welcome back to Enjoying the Word. We are thinking about the Bible study process, and we're right at the beginning of it. We are in this initial stage of look, where we look to see what the text is saying. And we've already asked a couple of questions just to kind of direct our thoughts in terms of what it could be saying. So who is in the passage? Any time references, the when kind of question. Well, here's another question. Where? Any location references. Could be geographic, it could be kind of heaven and earth, it could be conceptual places, although don't worry about that one too much. But we'll just notice when there's a where type of a location detail, it's always going to be worth noticing. So what have we got here? Back to John 12, the triumphal entry, the large crowd that had come to the feast. Where did they come from? Somewhere else. We know that there would have been people from Galilee. There were a lot of Jews in Galilee, for example. So the Jews from Galilee had come to Jerusalem. And so all these references here to Jerusalem, this is where the action was taking place. They're welcoming the King of Israel. Okay, they are shouting and crying out reference to Zion. That's a sort of Old Testament reference to the city of Jerusalem. Your king is coming to you. Implicit there. Where is he? Specifically sitting on a donkey's colt. Okay, so we've got these little details as we're going through here. Let's notice in verse 17 again, the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb. That's in Bethany, a couple of miles away. That crowd is bearing witness. We've got a crowd that went to meet him, probably coming out from Jerusalem, heading towards him. And then we've got a reference to the world. That's not really the place so much as the planet full of people, isn't it? From the Pharisees' perspective, they're saying, look, the world has gone after him. Everybody is flocking towards him. And they are starting to panic, of course. They're struggling with their loss of influence, loss of power, the fact that this Jesus has become incredibly popular. When you're thinking about the where question, it's always helpful to have a map. Okay, so there's maybe maps in the back of your Bible. You can look up maps on the internet, maybe buy a book of Bible maps if you're going to be seriously studying, and you'll find that maps can be very helpful. Here's a map I've taken from freebibleimages.org, assuming that that's what the name means. It's free, so I used it. We've got Jerusalem here. It's just kind of on its side. It's topographical. So we've got the Mount Zion, this mountain here. We've got Mount Moriah, where the temple is here. We've got a couple of valleys. So the Ben Hinnom Valley coming around this side, and then the Kidron Valley coming through here. And so these are, maybe familiar names, place names, and so on. Key point, I suppose, really, when you look at a map of Jerusalem is find the temple. So there's the temple, Temple Mount. Now notice the roads here across the bottom of the page to the Dead Sea. You can go down that way. You could go to Bethany, this side of this little mountain peak here. Mountain's a bit grandiose of a term, so that could go that way, potentially could go around that side of it as well, depending on what the roads were like at the time. But you've got the road to Bethany, you've got the road to Jericho. So these roads on the bottom of the map are important for what we're reading, because the Jews have come up to Jerusalem for the feast. And if they're coming from Galilee, they wouldn't come straight south, which in this map is from that direction, because that would mean going through Samaria. John 4 tells us the Jews tried to avoid Samaria. So instead, they would have come the other side of the Jordan River and get to Jericho and sort of come up that way. So you've got on this side of town, potentially in this valley here, a whole lot of camping Galilean Jews. These would be the crowd referenced in verse 12, the ones that heard he was coming and started shouting and celebrating and calling him king. Very likely this is a crowd of Jews that have come staying on this side of town. The city would have been absolutely heaving with people. If they didn't have family members to stay with, or if the guest rooms were all full, then they would probably be camping out Kidron Valley side of Jerusalem. That's the crowd that welcomes Jesus. We've got the crowd from Bethany 2 miles away that saw Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead. They're going to be in the mix here, bearing witness in the city and in the environment for several weeks as to what they've seen. And they're milling together with the Galilean Jews that are on this side of town. And then you've got the whole world going out after him, people coming out of Jerusalem, and the Pharisees are mentioned noticing that. So what do we do with a map like this? Well, it helps us to picture what's going on. Jesus is coming to Jerusalem, and let's take this road as being the one, and crossing over here and either in there or potentially up through the sheep gate and then into the temple that side. Either way, he's coming in this territory, coming to Jerusalem. The crowd is celebrating him. And of course we know, don't we, that a few days later there's a crowd stood outside of Pontius Pilate's doorstep calling for Jesus to be crucified. Now here's the thing. These Galilean Jews that were staying on this side of town would have been barely waking up at first light on the Friday morning. 6:30, all of the trial stuff is beginning, and that trial is happening right over here in Herod's palace. Is it really likely that these are the same people that were there shouting, "Crucify him"? I don't think so. These would have been temple workers getting pulled out of their beds, the ones that lived there, and being pulled into the Herod's palace before getting into work at the start of the day. Totally different crowd. It's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. You know, it's interesting to notice the details of what's going on in a passage and the implications for what we see as far as our understanding of other passages as well. So when you have a chance to look at a map and make sense of what you're reading, go for it. Notice what is there, because that's the goal at this early stage in our study, is to look and to see what the text says.